Hello and welcome to Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. My name is Sam Marvin. I am your co-host here with my other co-host, Sean. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, drinking my cider and ready to talk about Return of the King.
Ooh, now for those of you who are in the know, Sean is a home brewer. Although you make mead, is that technically brewing or is that fermenting? How do you call that?
You know, I think for the most part, people say brew. I choose to use the term ferment because I'm not brewing beer over here. I'm fermenting honey. So I use ferment, but I think people kind of use brew interchangeably.
So he is a fermenter brewer, however you wish to cut it.
Yeah.
And I guess that falls under the nerdy things category. This is not an episode about fermenting, brewing, or mead making, but
it can be. I currently have 2 batches of persimmon banana mead that I have.
You shared an image of you preparing that on a thread with some family members, and the reactions were generally of disgust.
It looks horrifying right now. So that's the funny thing. The house we rent, there's 2 persimmon trees on the side yard, and the persimmons, like, they're not the big variety, they're kind of small, the small variety, but they fall into the sidewalk and people don't look and just step on them, so the sidewalk is getting pretty gross.
Oh gosh.
And I was like, yeah, I just got to pick a bunch of them. Carly and I went through, we pulled all the seeds out and I put them in a mead, so we're gonna try it. The funny thing is I hate the taste. So when I just eat persimmon,
this meat is going to be delicious.
Like yeah.
Okay.
So I could make this meat and it's going to end up being fucking horrible. At least to me.
It could be great. Maybe there's a market out there for persimmon banana.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the fermentation process will take what I hate about persimmons out of it. I don't know. But I'll let you know in a couple months how this thing turns out. And I added banana because I was like, maybe some banana will take the edge off of the persimmon. I don't know what I was thinking. It could just be horrible, but we'll see.
Now, I've had a persimmon, I think once ever, and I like Earl Grey tea, which has persimmon peel in it, but I don't know if I remember what an actual, a fresh persimmon tastes like. Is it
Dude,
citrusy?
I don't even know how to explain it.
Okay.
I told Carly after I took a bite of one, the fruit itself, I thought that I was allergic to it because it made my tongue go numb kind of.
Oh God.
And Carly was like, "Oh no, that's just the little fibers of the fruit do that to your tongue." To which my response was, why the fuck would you eat this fruit then if it constantly made your tongue feel numb? Oh God.
Okay.
So maybe the mead making process will remove that aspect of the fruit and I will enjoy it more. But really, once we upload this episode, I'll take a picture I'll post the picture that I took of
there you go. Let people know what you're dealing with.
My carboys here, and we'll see how gross it looks. Yeah. And then at the end, I'll post what the final product looks like. It's probably going to look a lot better than it does now. But anyway, that's my mead update.
Yeah, well, you heard it here, folks. Stay tuned for meat updates. This is Persimmon Watch 2023, entering our first week. But that's not why you came here. That's not why we're here. We're here to talk about the Return of the King Extended Edition Part 2, looking at the scenes that were added for the Extended Edition. The way things are going to work, Sean is going to recap the scenes. His rewatch is the most fresh and up to date, and he took copious notes.
And I took notes.
Yep. And then I'm going to react to them because I watched them a little bit less recently and I didn't take any notes. So Sean, take it away.
Yeah. And we're not doing the scenes that were already in the theatrical and more was added to them. We're only doing the brand new scenes. So if you want The scenes with more content go to a different podcast. But stay with us too. Corsairs of Umbar is our first scene. It is actually the very first scene of the second disc of the extended edition. We see Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas confront the Corsair pirates. There's a little dialogue between the captain of one of the ships and Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn. Legolas fires a warning shot, kind of nudged by Gimli, and we see Peter Jackson's cameo where he's killed by said arrow. And then the ghosts of Under the Mountain attack and kill all of the pirates of Umbar. Sam, was this scene necessary? Should it have been cut? Are you happy it's in the extended edition? Tell me about it.
It's okay without
Great
it.
Content.
Yeah. Yeah.
What'd you think about this? It's okay.
Yeah, no, I don't want to come down too hard on it. I think it's a little goofy with the nudging of the arrow.
Yeah, because there's even the "you and whose army."
Yeah, it's a little modern. I understand why they cut it, but I think without having the army of the dead show up and then kind of demonstrate how Aragorn and Gimli, Legolas got to the battlefield, things wouldn't make a ton of sense. And I don't know specifically if the theatrical release had a scene explaining that, and this was like another scene that came in front of it, but
no,
to that extent, you need it.
Yeah, in the theatrical, I'm pretty sure you get them exiting the tunnel, and then you see the Gondorian village on fire, and then the Corsair ships sailing up the river. But that still leaves the interpretation of the individual to be like, okay, the army of ghosts intercedes at this moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think you need a scene that shows the army of the men under the mountain arriving before the kind of climactic reveal at the Battle of Pelennor Fields. But not a huge fan of the way the scene was executed, primarily because of the comedy stuff.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Cool.
With
there we
your
go.
Assumption of that. Okay. Rubber stamp of agreement on that one. Moving on.
It's okay.
It's okay. Next up, Merry's Simple Courage. Here we have Merry and Éowyn kind of taking a break from the Rohirrim's charge towards Gondor. Merry doubts his abilities, saying that he is not a knight of the Rohirrim, but he wants to help his friends nonetheless. And then there's kind of a nice quiet moment between Éowyn and Merry as Éowyn watches Merry kind of talk about these things, and that he just really wishes he could see his friends again. Then Éomer recalls the charge that they need to quit their break and charge towards Gondor again, in which we see Merry grabbing his helmet bravely and just ready to carry on. What do you think about this scene, Sam?
I don't need it as much. You already get a sense of Merry's courage when he joins the ride of the Rohirrim and then on the battlefield itself. So you don't need him talking about it. And you also get a scene later on with him and Pippin reunited, where his kind of devotion comes through more visually than just through the dialogue. So I don't think this was a necessary scene.
I'm happy this one was cut. This was, to me, it also makes the arrival in Gondor at Minas Tirith, it makes it better when you don't hear from the Rohirrim, because then you don't know where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get this, the culminating scene of Minas Tirith is about to fall, Rohirrim arrive just in time, and then the charge takes place, it's more surprising that way instead of knowing that the Rohirrim are on their way. So, yeah, cut it.
Agreed. All right.
Next up, Tomb of the Stewards. As Minas Tirith is under siege, a snapped Denethor brings the still alive Faramir to the tombs to burn his body like the kings of old. to me, it shows how far away the tombs are, which is always my one qualm with with adding this scene. And I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to talk first this time. I hope that's okay.
Nah, go for it.
In the theatrical cut, when Denethor catches on fire and he runs, it makes it look like he runs from pretty much the throne room out the front past the tree and over the little cliff. But this scene shows you how far of a walk it is from the White Tree of Gondor to these tombs, which are like across a bridge over this deep chasm, like way behind the throne room. It's like its own city back there where all of these tombs are.
Which is book accurate, right?
Yeah, it's book accurate, but later when you see Denethor on fire and you realize how far he had to run completely engulfed in flames to get to that payoff scene of him jumping off the cliff front of Minas Tirith, I just don't buy that he could stay alive that long while fully engulfed in flames. So then I just wish that one thing would have changed a little bit, but that's my thoughts on this scene.
I think we're probably going to agree on this one as well, where you don't really need it, and it raises more questions than it adds to the movie. Where my thing is, you in the theatrical cut you get the cool lines of, burn like the heathen kings of old, and set a fire in our flesh, and then the real climax of Pippin and Gandalf arriving and saving Faramir. And you don't need additional scenes before that setting up the location, because we're going to spend so little time there. Where in the book, I understand why Tolkien added that scene, and I think it was also part of the character building with Baragond, the guy who is kind of Pippin's guide in the Tower Guard. But in the movie, you don't really need all this. You want to quickly cut to the important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy it's not in the theatrical, but I like that it's in the extended, so I can actually see the tombs and all of that in the back. So this is one where I go, definitely not needed for theatrical, but I enjoy that it's in the extended cut so I can see the stuff.
They needed a little, like a little access window or something like that, so that Denethor could have just jumped out of that instead of having to run all the way back to the main area,
to the front. Yeah. And this scene also shows more of Denethor's madness.
That's true. That is true.
So I don't know. I'm thinking it was more necessary than I originally thought, but I'm going to move on.
Let's do it. Let's not think too hard
before I change my mind. Next up is the Witch King's Hour. Now, if everybody recalls back to our Battle Royale episode,
some bullshit in this scene.
This scene was my proof. That was very clear proof that Sam and Mike decided to ignore entirely. So, in this scene, Minas Tirith is currently falling. The gates are broken open. Orcs, trolls, I think wargs too, are kind of like running through the city, killing everybody. Pippin runs down to the city to find Gandalf fighting. He tells Gandalf that Faramir is about to be burned alive. Gandalf grabs Pippin, and they start charging up the levels of Minas Tirith when they are attacked by the Witch King. Witch King breaks Gandalf's staff, and I love the line that the Witch King says, and he goes something like, "Old fool, don't you know death when you see it?" or something like that. Such a cool line.
It's a good line.
And in that moment, after the staff is broken, Gandalf accepts death and is just laying there like a little coward as he's about to be eaten. And then the Rohirrim charge and distract the Witch King, thus saving Gandalf and Pippin. To me, this is a pretty short scene. So really, it could have been included. And it would answer why in the theatrical cut, Gandalf just suddenly doesn't have his staff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he has it at the end again, doesn't he? Like when he's leaving the Grey Havens, I'm almost positive he has his staff.
Pretty sure he does, yeah.
Come on, Peter.
Well, he cut the scene, so...
I know, but they cut it, but then he doesn't have it, and then he has it. So then it doesn't make sense that he wouldn't have it at the Black Gate, is what I'm saying.
Have we ever had any Peter Jackson commentary about this scene in particular?
Dude, we would have to rewatch the hours and hours and hours of extended
All right, people.
scenes.
That's the
Or
next.
not
That's the
extended
next.
scenes, but behind the scenes footage.
That's the next run of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We're gonna rewatch the extended editions with the director's commentary.
Yeah, it's like 30 hours of material.
Anyway,
But what
Did
are you
you have-
thinking? Like, what about the scene?
I don't like it. First of all, it's kind of dissonant with the rest of things because it establishes the Witch King as being on the top of Gondor, hearing the arrival of the Rohirrim, and then immediately flying away. And then you don't see him for an extended period of time before he just shows up on the battlefield against Theoden. And so it's kind of like, well, where was the Witch King during all that? I don't like the breaking of the staff and I don't like Gandalf kind of accepting death, because in the book, Gandalf meets this confrontation happens at the gate, and Gandalf is there defiant, and there is no indication that the Witch King could so easily destroy his staff, which, I mean, the staff is supposed to be kind of the embodiment of the wizard's power, and you're, again, inaccurately demonstrating or showing that the Witch King is stronger than Gandalf. So I understand. I'm glad that they cut it from the theatrical release. It's an okay scene. Like, some of the lines from the Witch King are cool. The
sound effects.
The sound effects of the beast.
No, of when the staff breaks, you have the Witch King raising his sword.
The sword catching on fire is,
and then you hear like that high-pitched whining, and then it goes like an absence of sound. Like that, the effect of not having sound in that scene is impressive.
Yeah,
because then that results in it results in the staff breaking. But
yeah, it's like a miniature black hole or something like that, which that is cool. But you can have a cool looking scene that doesn't serve the story well, and I don't think the scenes serve the story well. There's also a strange edit. Have you ever seen commentary about this, where the Witch King leaving, flying away, it's edited strangely, so it's like a cut in the movement of the fell beast. That's a nitpick, but
I don't recall that.
I'm not a huge fan of the scene from a story perspective. Visually, sound design, it's cool.
Next up, the Houses of the Healing. Éomer finds Éowyn on the fields of Pelennor. Pippin also is looking for Merry on the fields of Pelennor. Aragorn shows his healing abilities, which is huge in the books. Still no real mention of like a prophecy that the
hands of the king are the hands of a healer.
Yeah. And then there's also no mention of the Black Breath, which is what he's actually healing. Am I correct in Minas Tirith?
Yeah, you are. And which is funny because that connects back to the scene that we just discussed, where Pippin is hit with the Black Breath, seemingly from the fell beast. And that it kind of explains why he goes slightly, I won't say comatose, but he's in shock. And yeah, the Black Breath is actually a pretty significant malady. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in the Houses of the Healing, that is what Aragorn is primarily treating for Merry and Éowyn, is Black Breath, not the broken arm that he is healing in this film. I mean, yeah, for me, it's just, this is a huge sticking point in the books, like how we know that Aragorn is the rightful king of Gondor. And he kind of goes in secretly too.
Yeah.
In the books, where it's like I think she's like a nurse or something that he interacts with. And then she kind of realizes that he's the king when he's in there healing people. Yeah.
It's a great chapter in the book that I really didn't appreciate until my most recent reread. And I think I actually mentioned it in one of our episodes around that time, where he sneaks in to the city and he uses his healing power. It does impress one of the people there, but there's also like a master healer who's kind of in charge of the Houses of Healing. And he and Aragorn get into a little spat where Aragorn's basically throwing a shade on them for not keeping they're not keeping their herb garden properly, and not knowing about
not having king's foil. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, it's just a weed. And he's like, you dumb bastards.
Yeah. It's like, you're fired. When I'm the king, you're so fired.
Hey, you, Douglas, you're out of here. Okay, so we both agree. Good scene. Just
Good
should have
scene.
been
Yeah.
expanded a little bit more.
Yep. Yep.
Next up is a bad scene. The captain and the white lady.
No, no,
Faramir.
you skipped the Aragorn masters the
Oh, you're
Palantir.
right. I did. Yes, yes, yes. My apologies. This is a good scene. Aragorn masters the Palantir. Aragorn goes to the throne room, reveals himself to Sauron via Palantir, and also reveals a reforged Anduril. During his little conversation with Sauron, his necklace from Arwen breaks. And then the next scene is him as the king riding towards the Black Gate. Now, a couple things. In the books, Denethor is holding the Palantir when he burns himself alive, right? Because doesn't this Palantir have like his burned hand on the Palantir forever now? Or something like that? I'm almost positive that's like this one is almost useless now because Denethor's burned hands are always on it.
Well, so that's a good question, right? So in the book, there are two Palantir. There's the Palantir of Minas Tirith, which Denethor has used and has contributed to him losing his mind. And then there's the Palantir of Orthanc, which is the one retrieved by Gandalf, touched by Pippin, and then carried with Gandalf to
Minas Tirith.
Minas Tirith, which eventually then Aragorn uses. But there is something about the burning hands of Denethor.
Yeah, because technically in this film there should be two Palantir.
Yeah.
And I don't think they ever show Denethor having one.
No.
So I think we're led to believe that the one Aragorn uses is the one Gandalf brought.
I think that's yeah. You're right. You're right on that. So I think they kind of just ignored the fact because they don't really ever talk about what drove Denethor mad.
Mm-hmm.
Do they? I don't think there's even a scene in the extended editions.
No, I think they just lead you to believe that he's gone mad over the death of his son, the apparent death of his second son, and then the falling of the city under his control. I think all of that is supposed to be your driving factor for madness.
Yeah. And in the book, they're a little bit more clear through both dialogue with Denethor and then also either Faramir or Boromir talking about how, oh, my father's a man of strong will. Like he will even like test his will against Sauron or something like that. And it's not really clear exactly what he means at the time, but then it becomes clearer that it's through the use of the Palantir. Either way, but I think we're a little off track here. You're talking
not
about
entirely. I think we're still pretty on. I mean, do you think it's necessary?
I don't know if it's 100% necessary because they already they make it clear in the movie that the eye of Sauron can look a ways away and could, theoretically, his gaze could be drawn without the Palantir. And they already have the debate about the necessity to go to the Black Gate and to, for Aragorn to reveal himself, which I think, that being said, this scene is pretty awesome because it shows how badass Aragorn is.
It's a fucking cool scene, man.
And it's even like it's really bittersweet, right? With the dropping of the necklace. And so, yeah, I like it a lot. I understand why they cut it, but any chance for Aragorn to be a badass is
like when
cool
he holds up Anduril in front of the Palantir and he's like, come at me, bro. Like that's such a cool scene.
Yeah.
And it also leads because this jumps straight into King Elisar on horseback riding towards the Black Gate. And if I recall in the books, it is not an easy road to the Black Gate. They are assailed almost the entire way, correct?
I don't recall.
I'm almost positive there's like little skirmishes along the way. And that like sometimes troops like either join up or decide not to go, things like that.
There is a scene, there is a point where Aragorn allows a number of troops to not go to the Black Gate and instead tells them to go take an island in the middle of the Anduin. I think Caer Andros is I think that's the name of the island. I can't remember specifically, but it was kind of like a way for them to maintain their honor despite not going to the
Black Gate.
And it's presented as those people were afraid of going to the Black Gate, but they would, take on this island held by the orcs. So there is that, but I don't recall any skirmishes specifically. I think Tolkien talks about how like the fell beasts, the Nazgul were kind of circling above them, and that was the fear of their presence was affecting the men. And like did they even go by Minas Morgul? I don't remember if they.
No, Minas Morgul is the other direction.
Yeah, so I think they like bypassed that. I can't remember all the specifics, but
Yeah.
I don't recall any like battles or skirmishes except for kind of some of the men peeling off to go take that island.
Next up is the scene that I was saying was unnecessary. The captain and the white lady, Faramir and Eowyn, in the houses of the healing, comfort each other, looking out as the army leaves Minas Tirith to go towards the Black Gate. And they seem to fall in love they start holding hands. Now, this scene adds almost nothing to me. And when you get to them being together at like the coronation of Aragorn, I don't know, to me, like, it just makes sense that you've built Faramir up to be this honorable guy. Eowyn is like an honorable shield maiden of Rohan. I can assume that they've gotten together. You don't need to include this weird, like 25-second interaction of them all of a sudden holding hands. Like that to me doesn't make sense.
It's a little dissonant because you go from all of the action of Pelennor and the very, the last debate scene, the mastering the Palantir. Things are pretty intense, both on what Sam and Frodo are doing, what Aragorn, Gandalf, and everybody else that we care about is doing. And then you have this interlude with a kind of a love song and a lot of wistful looking at each other from around corners and leaning on pillars and stuff like that. And then they're, romantically involved. I'm completely with you. You don't need to see the lead up. You just need to see them together at the coronation. Be like, oh yeah, they got together. That makes sense.
Faramir's dad, like 2 nights before, just burned himself alive.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy shit happening.
Yeah, you got to deal with that first, man.
So, and to contrast it, I understand why they cut it from the theatrical release. You don't need the scene. It's a little weird. It's out of place. In the book, it's much more fleshed out, and you get much more of Faramir kind of helping Eowyn deal with her the trauma of everything she's been through and her feelings about the way that her life has unfolded. And it's really sweet. And again, not everything that Tolkien does in the book is about action and moving the drama and the fights forward. It's a much different book than the movie, especially the end of Return of the King. So I understand why they cut it. I don't, maybe in some parts, like maybe it was in there. See, here's the thing. Maybe it was in there to appeal to female members of the audience who maybe got a little tired of the battle scenes, and it was a little interlude.
I mean, maybe, but like 25 seconds. I don't know. If that's your purpose, give me a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I'm all for a love story. I mean, that's not just for the female audience. That's for me too.
Well, I mean, we've talked about the love story of Arwen and Aragorn, and I think obviously it's spread out over the 3 movies. There's a lot more tension there with her being an elf and him being a man, and his challenge from Elrond basically. And that, pays off really well. There's good setup and good payoff. For here, there's not nearly enough setup to make it worthwhile. And you don't want to spend too much time setting up another romance this late into the trilogy. So I understand why they cut it.
Cut the scene. Our next extended scene is called In the Company of Orcs. Frodo and Sam get stuck with a company of orcs as they head towards the Black Gate to confront our hopeless heroes. They decide to blend in. As they're marching towards the Black Gate to escape, they start a fight, and during the commotion, they both kind of duck away and are able to scatter away from the company of orcs. This scene, personally, I wish would have been included, only because when you see Sam and Frodo after the pass of Cirith Ungol, and they're looking out over the plains of Gorgoroth, there are so many goddamn orcs that it is not feasible that they would be able to get from there to Mount Doom without seeing one of them. So I like that they're able to kind of blend in with the Kirithungal armor. Now, it doesn't make sense that they're so close to them and not one orc is like, yeah, you don't look like us. So that part I kind of don't like, but I don't know. I like this scene. And then you're also seeing like orc culture in terms of like military orc culture and seeing what it's like to be just like a grunt soldier in Sauron's army. So I appreciated that as well. But I don't know. I think for the most part, I would have liked this scene to have been included. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's okay. It does kind of beg some questions about. I don't think their disguises are so good, or that we're supposed to believe that the orcs are that dumb. And then you have the one orc who seems to be smelling them, but he also doesn't have a nose, which on the one hand, it makes sense why somebody without a nose wouldn't be able to smell somebody who's not an orc. But then also, why is he sniffing so intently? Like, it's not like, oh, his nose is stuffed. It's like, no, his nose has been cut off and covered up.
Yeah.
So it's a little strange. I think this is book accurate, if I recall correctly. Like, I know in the book, Sam and Frodo are assumed to be orcs and forced to march away from Mount Doom for a significant period of time. But to be fair, I don't know what purpose this all serves, except in the book to lengthen the amount of time that Frodo and Sam are at Mount Doom, so the timelines line up when they destroy the ring while the battle is happening. So it's maybe interesting as a little bit of something that we don't normally see, which is the orcs together. And usually when that happens, it's at least slightly comedic, with thinking of the Uruk-hai and, looks like meat's back on the menu, or some of the stuff with the orc. I think his name is Gothmog, the deformed orc, who's like a Harvey Weinstein reference.
Which is also one of the things I love about Tolkien is his reusing of names. His Gothmog is also the Lord of Balrogs in the Silmarillion. Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I get why they cut it. It's not a great scene for me. I mean, thinking about this versus, Aragorn, Masters of Palantir, it's kind of a clear thing, but they're a couple of fun moments.
Our last scene, and the one that is criminal that it was removed from the theatrical cut, is the mouth of Sauron. After their arrival to the Black Gates, the gates open and the mouth of Sauron approaches to discuss terms. Gandalf tells the mouth that Sauron must surrender and forsake his lands. After a brief confrontation between the two, and the mouth saying that they have Frodo by showing the mithril vest, and he tells Gandalf that Frodo did suffer at the hand of his hosts. After this, Aragorn cuts off the mouth's head and says that he cannot believe that Frodo has failed and that he will not believe it, thus leading to the charge in the last stand of the Alliance of Men. I absolutely love this scene. And the mouth of Sauron, if you watch the behind the scenes, actor Bruce Spence portrays the mouth. If you don't know who Bruce Spence is, he was also in films such as The Road Warrior. He was in Star Wars episode Matrix Revolutions. He's done some pretty good stuff. He's a pretty famous New Zealander actor. But what they did was they shot like the mouth of Sauron scenes, and then they CGI'd his mouth to be like 300% the normal size of a man. And when you look at the detail of the mouth's costume, like his eye, he wears this tall helm where his eyes are covered and all you can see is his mouth, but there's black speech written on the helmet if you look at the details. And then also Peter Jackson talks about how the words that the mouth of Sauron speaks are so evil and corrupt that bile spits from his mouth and like the sides of his mouth rip and tear all the time. Like, this character is so fucking cool and developed in such a cool way. And then you just remove him from the theatrical cut. So I don't even think you need to say anything. You'll just agree with me that this is a fucking awesome scene that should have been
will
included. Yeah. I mean, do you disagree with that?
No, I will give one caveat, which is
Okay.
technically speaking, this was an embassy, and it was a parley prior to a battle, and the parties to the parley should have had immunity from being victims of violence. And so Aragorn chopping his head off is a violation of the rules of war. So it's a little unkingly to do that, which is my only qualm with it. But that's it. Yeah, this is a great scene. The Mouth of Sauron is one of the most disturbing images in Tolkien, and it's kind of a shame we don't get him in the theatrical release, because it was kind of, I know I've heard about the increasing digitally the size of his mouth and some of those details, and it's just such a cool thing.
And I think in lore, isn't the black, or the Mouth of Sauron, isn't he like a black Numenorian?
Yeah, so I actually just watched a YouTube video about this, I think from In Deep Geek, one of those Tolkien content creators on YouTube who's pretty good and does a lot of research. And yeah, he's a black Numenorian, and this guy was speculating that this was actually the messenger that appeared at the Lonely Mountain, kind of asking the dwarves to tell Sauron about hobbits and Shire and stuff like that, and promising rings of power in exchange for that information. And yeah, he's mentioned as being like long in the service of Sauron, and speculated that he has kind of dark sorcery and things like that. So yeah, it's a cool character.
And that's one of the things I love about the Shadow of War games and the Shadow of Middle Earth Xbox games. I guess they're on PlayStation 2, but those games that came out, but they develop that lore of Mordor in terms of like these types of beings that are in service to Sauron. And it's all fabricated outside of the Mouth of Sauron, but there's also like the Tower of Sauron, which is like Sauron's torturer and all of these other things. And it's cool to see, even though it's like fan fiction, but like the development of these like high-ranking lieutenants who serve under Sauron. So yeah, even just for, if you play the games just for the lore that you get, or the fake lore, the floor.
Floor, you coining that? I like that.
The fake lore, the floor.
Well, the fanfic.
The fanfic, yeah. The game itself is fun, but you also get more of that. But yeah, just great stuff. Mouth of Sauron, creepy as shit. Cool guy. Gone too soon.
Gone too soon. We barely knew thee. So that's it for the new scenes. Obviously, there's lots of other scenes from the movie that are fantastic, but we're not going to discuss them today. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've seen The Return of the King. You know it's awesome. Go rewatch it. It's a great time of the year to do it. It's always fun to watch to return to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Every time I watch, I feel like there's something that I haven't seen before, I haven't appreciated enough. And that's the mark of a great movie, great trilogy.
When I was rewatching these scenes, I had to stop and watch The Charge of the Rohirrim. That legit every time gives me chills.
100% every time.
So good. And I mean, I'll still go to bat for Theoden, one of the greatest characters in Peter Jackson's trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
We are done talking extended editions. Next week, Sam and I have homework. We're coming up on the year anniversary of the end of season 1 of Rings of Power. Sam and I talked about doing a rewatch 1 year later to see how much we still hate Rings of Power. But what we decided to do instead, at least for next week, is to kind of figure out how we would have done it. We're going to operate under the parameters that Rings of Power had to operate, where they don't have access to the Silmarillion, and they have to make a show based off of the Lord of the Rings and the Lord of the Rings appendices. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to come up with our own, how would we have made the show? And we're going to pitch each other our ideas, and then we'll talk about those ideas and try to see whose makes the most sense.
And specifically, it's going to be a second age of Middle Earth show, correct?
Correct.
The same time period that Lord of the Ring or the Rings of Power chose?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one day we should do how would we make a Silmarillion show? Because I'm currently listening to Andy Serkis's rendition of the audiobook, and he's phenomenal. If you want a good voice actor to kind of read you the Silmarillion, he does really, really good work. And some of those stories, man, are ripe for some kind of adaptation. I just finished the story of Turin, and just heartbreaking, dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
So good.
That would have been a good
one. I forgot the line. Turin's dad, Hurin, I can't remember the name of the battle. The one where the men of Dorloman are like the rear guard and save the retreating Turgon of Gondolin or something.
Oh, and either the Battle of Unnumbered Tears or the Battle of Sudden Flame, but probably Unnumbered Tears.
I think it's Unnumbered Tears, because that's the one where this is the battle where they pile all the heads or bodies and it creates the mound.
Yeah, it was like the last big battle before the actual War of Wrath.
Yeah, before the War of Wrath. Yeah, and Hurin, like on top of his pile of dead enemies that he's slaying, apparently chants 75 times, "Day will come again," as he's constantly slaying orcs. Just how cool would that scene be of a guy just screaming "Day will come again" as he's killing all of these orcs and evil beings? And oh man,
what is Hurin described? How is he described in the books? What does he look like?
So at the beginning, he's just like a really strong, powerful lord of men. But then he gets captured at the end of that battle for like 30 years or something.
Oh, yeah. And he's then, like chained to the top of Thangorodrim, right?
Something like that. And then he's released. It's like one of the last omens or prophecies of the curse that Morgoth puts on Hurin that leads to the downfall of Gondolin, because that's how he reveals where Gondolin is, because it's a secret and it's kept hidden. And then he releases Hurin after 30 years, and Hurin goes to like the region where Gondolin is and can't find an entrance, and then is like standing and screaming at the mountains and like curses the elves or something. And then Morgoth goes, "That's where Gondolin is," because Hurin is yelling in that direction. And that's how the final city of elves falls.
So who would play Hurin?
I think you'd have to get two actors, young Hurin and old Hurin.
So
we can talk about this. This is a whole nother episode, man.
So a James Brolin and a Josh Brolin.
Possibly.
All right. Well, if that is the type of thing that you're interested in,
were aroused at that little conversation, look out for a Silmarillion episode.
All right, folks. So that wraps up our coverage of the extended edition trilogy for Lord of the Rings. As Sean said, next week we'll be discussing our approach to a Lord of the Rings Second Age show. Kind of how would we have done the Rings of Power? Not specifically those storylines. We will talk about what we would have done specifically. And then in the future, we will do this similarly for the Silmarillion. If that's what you like, stick around, subscribe to Els Rings and Nerdy Things. Give us a like on Facebook. Shoot us an email, elsringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our supporters. Sean, anything else that you'd like to say to the folks out there in podcast land?
That's it. I'm done. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.